Guess what? It's time for a prediction video. I know stuff. Nebraska went 6-6 last year, and while I'll admit that might not sound great, it of course was the first time they made a bowl game in almost a decade. They finished up 7-6 after winning that bowl game. You know, when you talk to older people about Nebraska, by older I mean maybe my age or older, or younger people about Nebraska, not in terms of what they are today, but like Nebraska overall as a program, it almost seems like those two groups of people are talking about two different teams or two different programs, sort of people my age and older or younger than me. To those of you younger than me that maybe have a hard time understanding the Nebraska is a blue blood thing, or having a hard time understanding maybe why people tend to expect something from Nebraska that you haven't seen in a long, long time. From 1962 to 2001, Nebraska didn't win 9 games or more twice. That's it. In a 40-year period, basically, from about 1960 to 2001. I think the exact years are 1962 to 2001. So I guess that's 39 years, 40 seasons, though. They won 9 games or more every single year except for 2. Now, you probably know about their dominance in the 90s. They had what I think is one of the greatest college football teams of all time in 1995, but they have fallen on hard times over the last 10 to 15 years, especially kind of more generally this century. They really have not been as good. Well, if you look at the 1962 to 2001 period and how good they were there, 9 or more wins every season except for 2 out of that 40-year period. The last 25 years for Nebraska has not been nearly as good as the previous 40. That goes without saying. Can they get back to where they once were? I've talked about this before. I'm not so sure. I think college football has changed a lot. That's not to say that Nebraska can't become a good program again, and who knows, maybe they can have a magical year and win a national title. But I don't really foresee a situation where Nebraska gets back to being sort of the premier program in college football, or even one of the top 4 or 5 programs in college football. And there's a couple of reasons why that is. One is geography. The college football has become more national in the last 25 years than it was sort of last century. Teams are recruiting all over the place, coast to coast. Now your sort of powerhouse programs are going and plucking the best players out of everywhere, as opposed to a more regional recruiting model, which was going on prior to that, which I think benefited Nebraska over some of the more better programs today. The Florida programs, the recruiting in Texas and California, and even in Georgia. And the other thing is NIL, and I'm not saying Nebraska doesn't have any money, but I don't know if they can compete with some of the other teams when it comes to money. But we'll see. But again, that doesn't mean that Nebraska. I'm not saying this to say that Nebraska should have gone 10 years without making a bowl game. I'm not saying this to crap on Nebraska, and it's probably coming off that way. I really don't mean it that way. I think Nebraska has some disadvantages in today's college football that they didn't necessarily have 30 or 40 years ago. And again, that doesn't mean that they can't have great seasons. That doesn't mean they can't make playoffs. And, if things go right, that doesn't mean they couldn't potentially win a national title at some point. I mean, I guess what I'm saying is I can't see Nebraska having another decade like they had in the 90s. That doesn't mean they can't have a bunch of good years. I think they can. But when I look at Nebraska today, in terms of their ability to make runs in the playoff or potentially win a national title, it strikes me as more of a TCU situation from a couple of years ago, or Indiana last year. In other words, you're going to have right now with the 12 potentially going to a 16-team playoff, you're going to have 5, 6, 7, 8 teams out of that 12. They're kind of always in the playoff mix. I don't think Nebraska is going to be one of those, but I do think Nebraska is a team that can be one of the other sort of 4 or 5 programs that gets into the playoffs every however so many years. Will this be one of those years for Nebraska? I don't know. 6-6 last year, 7-6 at after a bowl win. Good morning, it's Uncle Lou here. That's right, it is me, Uncle Lou, live on LouTube for you. Thanks for watching, and it's time for another prediction video. All right, we're going to talk about Nebraska today. Shout out to Jeremy Garrettson over in the Uncle Lou Patreon page. That's where I get these teams from to do the prediction videos. There's a post over there on Patreon. So if you're a member of my Patreon page, make sure you go over there because the list is really long already. You'll see the post on the top of the page about these prediction videos. Just comment the name of a team that you want to see me do one of these prediction videos for, and I'll get it knocked out over the course of the next couple of months. If you're not on the Uncle Lou Patreon page and you want to check it out, the link is in the description of the video, and there's a promo code right now if you sign up that gives you 50% off. All of that information is scrolling on the bottom of the screen, and again, the link is in the description of the video. All right, let's talk about Nebraska. I already mentioned it, 6-6 last year, which not great. But it did get them bowl eligible, which was a big deal because it's something they hadn't done in almost a decade there at Nebraska. They won their bowl game, finishing 7-6. A lot of expectations for Nebraska in 2025, higher than normal, given the fact that they went to 6-6 last year. And there's a couple of sort of factors that work into that. Number one, you got Dylan Raiola, a very highly rated, highly recruited 5-star quarterback in the last cycle. That Nebraska landed, and now has a full year of starting experience under his belt. And he wasn't terrible last year. We'll talk more about him in a second, but he's back now for his second year. You would expect sort of that second year bump from him. So that's reason to be excited. Number two, the schedule. No such thing as an easy schedule in the Big Ten. But you'll see if you look at the schedule, it's up there now, and you'll see as we start to go through it. When it comes to Big Ten schedules, you know, this isn't the most difficult schedule in the world. You caught a little bit of a break with the scheduling here. So I think and you've got Matt Rule, sort of his history of improving teams, you know, into his third and fourth year significantly. So there is some expectations heaped on Nebraska this year. I think maybe that we haven't seen in a while. Will they come to fruition? Well, offensively, they do have Dylan Raiola back, and 3 offensive linemen are back. But they lose their top wide receiver and their top running back. It was sort of a weird, almost like a trade situation. They sent their top running back from last year to Kentucky. I say they sent him there. Their top running back entered the portal and went to Kentucky. One of Kentucky's best wide receivers entered the portal and went to Nebraska. So basically, Nebraska's running back went to Kentucky. Kentucky's wide receiver came to Nebraska. So we'll see. I think in order for Nebraska to have kind of the season offensively that could potentially get them, you know, to the 8-9+ win mark, which is what you need to be doing if you want to have any sort of hope at making a college football playoff. I think Dylan Raiola is going to have a really big year. I don't think they necessarily have any dynamic superstars at the wide receiver position. I like Key, the guy they got from Kentucky, and their number 2 running back from last year looked good at times. I'm assuming he'll be the main guy this year, along with some young guys. But it seems like, you know, some teams are so talented sort of around the quarterback position that you look at them and you go, okay, as long as the quarterback doesn't sort of blow it. Ohio State from last year, right? Will Howard. Will Howard wasn't a bad quarterback, but he wasn't putting up Heisman caliber numbers either. He didn't need to on a team like Ohio State. Michigan the year before with J.J. McCarthy, same thing. Lights out defense and a great running game. J.J. McCarthy didn't need to throw for 5,000 yards. Georgia, the national title winners 2 years in a row before that. Some of the best defenses we've ever seen, really good running games, and Stetson Bennett quarterback, right? So with Nebraska, though, I don't see sort of, when I look at the roster from top to bottom, it doesn't look like Georgia in 21 and 22. It doesn't look like Michigan in 23. It doesn't look like Ohio State in 24. That's not to say they can't win a bunch of games. What I'm saying is that's the type of roster that needs the quarterback to sort of lead the way offensively. He's going to have a huge year, Dylan Raiola. On defense, I think they'll be okay on defense. In fact, they've been okay on defense really for the last couple of years under Matt Rule for the most part. They've had a few issues pop up here and there, but they played good defensively under Matt Rule. Like most teams in the country, they lose a few players to graduation, NFL, and portal. They bring in, you know, players through high school recruiting and the transfer portal as well. They got to answer some questions at edge rusher, but I think they're going to be okay defensively, particularly up front. Couple of question marks on the back end. But again, the schedule sets up I don't want to use the word easy. Again, there are no easy schedules in the Big Ten, but when you compare Nebraska's schedule in the Big Ten to some other schedules in the Big Ten, Wisconsin as an example, who'd you rather have, Nebraska's schedule or Wisconsin's schedule? Like, Nebraska's got a much more manageable road in terms of a schedule than a team like, say, Wisconsin does. Anyway, let's start going through the schedule. I'm going to go through it game by game, and I'm going to give you a winner and a loser for every single week. All right, the first thing that jumps out at me here when I see this schedule is the game against Cincinnati. So they open up with a non-con game against a power, I guess we're calling it Power 4 now, Power 4 opponent. Cincinnati, of course, longtime Group of 5 team, joined the Big 12 a couple of years ago, and they have not done well so far in their short time in the Big 12. This looks like a neutral site game for no reason at all. Cincinnati and Nebraska are playing in Kansas City, Missouri, because of course they are. Nebraska is a better team than Cincinnati. Defensively, especially, I think Cincinnati is going to have a hard time in this game. I would be absolutely shocked if Nebraska didn't start the season off at 1-0. I'm not completely crapping on Cincinnati here. I don't want to just dismiss them completely. It would be a Power 4 win for Nebraska, but this is a game, if Nebraska wants to get anywhere close to the 8+ win mark, 9-10 win mark, which is what you would need to do most likely in order to contend for a playoff spot. These are the types of games that have to just become no-brainers for somebody like Nebraska, because when you get into the conference schedule, even sort of your mid-tier teams in the Big Ten are going to be providing more of a challenge to you than games like Cincinnati, Akron, and whatever the hell HCU is. I don't know, what is HCU? Is that Houston? I don't know what that is. Houston Christian. Anyway, the first 3 games, Nebraska absolutely has to win, and I think they will. I think they'll beat Cincinnati, a Power 4 win to start the season, and then they come back home for 2 road games against lower classification teams, the Akron Zips and the HCU Huskies. I don't know what that is. Nebraska should be 3-0 and needs to be 3-0 because you see they're coming up after that in week 4, their first conference game of the year at home against Michigan. Now, look, you can tell me how bad Michigan was last year all you want. Okay, they were 7-5. That's a better record than Nebraska had, okay? And they got better as the season went along. Don't tell me they didn't. Their last 2 games of the year, they beat Ohio State and Alabama. So Michigan is no pushover. Now, you get them at home, and here's sort of what's going to be the difference in Nebraska's season, I think. These types of games, the Michigan game, the Southern Cal game, and the Penn State game, nobody, I don't think, expects Nebraska to win all 3 of those games. I would be surprised if there's even any Nebraska fans that would expect Nebraska to beat Michigan, Southern Cal, and Penn State. I mean, you're talking about the 3 toughest games on your schedule, the 3 best teams that you play, right? The difference in Nebraska's record at the end of the season, the difference between just sort of barely improving over last year and maybe finishing at 7-5 or 8-4 instead of 6-6, or potentially playing in November for an outside shot at the playoffs, the difference in those 2 outcomes is in these 3 games. Can they win any of them? Can they win 1 of them? 2 of them? Then can they avoid a loss to the lower end teams that are remaining on the schedule? Because that's easier said than done. Almost every team in the country ends up losing a game that you didn't see coming. You didn't expect them to win. Sort of a game they were favored, but they lost, right? Can you avoid that? And then how can you do against Michigan, Southern Cal, and Penn State? I can't give you the win here against Michigan. Now, it's at home, and this wasn't an easy decision for me. I'm not sky high on Michigan. I think Michigan's going to be better than they were last year. Their quarterback play was so bad last year, it's hard to imagine that it's going to be anywhere close to that this year, even if they go with the true freshman, who I think is going to end up being really good, Bryce Underwood. Their defense is really good. I think this is going to be, a really low-scoring game. I will say this. Michigan with the young quarterback, Bryce Underwood. Now, Michigan's going to be tested already by this point in the season. They will have played Oklahoma. So we'll know a lot about Bryce Underwood by the time this Nebraska-Michigan game comes around in week 4 on September 20th. Dylan Raiola versus Bryce Underwood, Dylan Raiola cannot get outplayed by Bryce Underwood if Nebraska wants to pull off the upset here at home against Nebraska. I think Dylan Raiola would have to have a massive game against what I think is a really, really good Michigan defense for Nebraska to have a chance to pull off the upset there. And then defensively, Nebraska is going to have to try to do some things to confuse Bryce Underwood and stuff the Michigan run game. At this point, I've got to sort of give the edge to Michigan there. I just think they're more talented overall. I actually think Nebraska might be a better coached team. And in the end, maybe that's enough for Nebraska to pull off the upset. Again, this isn't something that was an easy decision. I didn't just look at this and go, oh, there's no way Nebraska's winning this game. But I got to make a pick here, and I'm going to give Michigan the benefit of the doubt. I think they get the win. Nebraska takes their first loss of the season. They're 3-1. They then get a bye week to try to clean things up before hosting Michigan State, who I still think is kind of wandering the desert. I like Jonathan Smith, the coach they brought in from Oregon State a couple of years ago, but Michigan State was just such a mess under Mel Tucker. And then everything that happened as he was leaving. Even if Jonathan Smith ends up being a successful coach at Michigan State, which I think potentially he could, I think it's a situation there that's going to take more than 2 years. I don't think Michigan State's going to be very good this year. Again, this is a home game for Nebraska, so you've yet to play a true road game. You had the one neutral site game against Cincinnati, and then 1, 2, 3, this is your fourth straight home game after that. I think Nebraska gets the win against Michigan State. Now, back-to-back road trips here, which is difficult, at Maryland and at Minnesota. So I think Nebraska is probably a little bit better than both of those teams. And I would expect Nebraska to be a favorite against both of those teams. But road games are tricky. Back-to-back road games are exponentially tricky. So I wouldn't be shocked to see Nebraska lose one of these two road games. Now, the good news is they're not sandwiched between any sort of rivalry game or big matchup, right? They're sandwiched between Michigan State and Northwestern, two teams that I don't think are very good. So I actually think Nebraska goes on a little run here. I think they win on the road at Maryland. I think Dylan Raiola really starts to hit his stride at this point in the season. I think they win on the road at Minnesota, and I think they get a win back at home over Northwestern, setting up what will be a massive game for Nebraska, one of the biggest Nebraska games probably in a long time, a home game against Southern Cal. Southern Cal, one of the newer teams to the Big Ten, joining a couple of years ago along with Oregon, Washington, and UCLA. And there are some people that are expecting big things from Southern Cal this season. I'm not one of them, to be fair, but hell, I've been wrong before. I don't trust the Lincoln Riley defense. I mean, this whole deal about how they have a new coaching staff, this is the 5th or 6th time he's had a new defensive coaching staff. I don't buy it. They got a new quarterback again this year at Southern Cal. And look, Lincoln Riley, when it comes to quarterbacks, this guy's an absolute magician. I mean, the guy, there's nobody better on the planet, in my opinion, at finding elite quarterback talent, developing it, making it better, and turning it into a Heisman candidate than Lincoln Riley. And maybe he'll end up doing that again this season. I gave Michigan the win at home. I think Michigan is a better team than Southern Cal. I think by this point in the season, Nebraska, like I mentioned, hitting their stride offensively with Dylan Raiola in his second year as a starter. I'm going to give Nebraska the win here against Southern Cal. I actually think they beat Southern Cal at home, which would be probably Matt Rule's biggest win in his time at Nebraska and one of the biggest wins for Nebraska in a while. And so what does that put them at? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8-1. Nebraska sitting at 8-1 here. Now, then they go on the road to UCLA. I think they lose this one. This is, look, listen, I'm going to get laughed off the internet for saying this. UCLA is not very good. I'll admit that. They're clearly not as good as Southern Cal, and I've got you beating Southern Cal. How are you going to lose to UCLA? Football is about timing. It's about momentum. It's about emotion. It's about when you play, where on the schedule a game falls. I just think this big win over Southern Cal. And look, if you think I'm crazy about the UCLA thing and thinking they're going to lose, fine. Swap it around then. Lose to Southern Cal, beat UCLA. Either way, I think you head into your second bye week with 2 losses, okay, which would be on pace to have the best season Nebraska's had in a long, long time. That's the good news. The bad news is, and this has been a theme for Nebraska, really multiple years, over the last 2 or 3 years. They were 4-0 or 5-0, or there was that one season where they were sitting on 5 wins with 4 games to go and couldn't get that 6th win, to become bowl eligible. In other words, let me take a sip of water. There's been several seasons lately where Nebraska has, I don't really want to call it a second half of the season collapse. It's been in a lot of cases sort of the way the schedule is set up, and I think that's what it is here. If you look at the last 4 games, Southern Cal, UCLA, Penn State, and Iowa, those are 3 of the best teams you play all year when you're talking about Southern Cal, Penn State, and Iowa. I mean, obviously, I think Michigan is pretty good too, but none of these are really guaranteed wins. Nebraska's not at a point really as a program or as a team where they can look at any of those games, Southern Cal, UCLA, Penn State, or Iowa, and just go, oh, well, we're going to win that one. Iowa's got the suffocating defense. I understand that their offense is stuck in the black and white TV era, but their special teams are amazing. The coaching staff is consistent outside of the offensive coordinator who they changed a couple of years ago, but the head coach has been there for 40 years. They don't turn the ball over. They're just a tough team to beat. Now, you get them at home, Iowa, which is a big advantage. But at Penn State, I'm just going to go ahead and tell you, I'm on the Penn State hype train for this season. I think Penn State might be the best team in the country. They might win the national title. They're one of 3 or 4 teams I think it's got a really good shot. They return almost everybody on that team, including the quarterback, 2 best running backs. They went out and got the leading wide receiver off a Syracuse team last year. I mean, they're just loaded. They do lose Abdul Carter, the sort of do everything defensive the linebacker they have, but they're loaded on defense too. I don't think Nebraska's beating Penn State is what I'm saying. So I've got you losing to UCLA again. If you can't wrap your head around losing to UCLA, I get it. Just to give that loss to Southern Cal then you can beat UCLA. But anyway, I think you're splitting between Southern Cal and UCLA, and then I think you're losing at Penn State, and I think you're losing at home to Iowa. Great start to the season. You're sitting there at 8-1. I think you lose. Or 7-1. And then I think you lose 3 of your last 4 games there between Southern Cal, UCLA, Penn State, and Iowa. For the purposes of this prediction video, I'm going to give you a loss to Southern Cal. A win against Southern Cal, which I think will be, again, one of the biggest wins Nebraska's had in a while. So a win against Southern Cal, and then losses to close out the season to UCLA, Penn State, and Iowa. Nebraska finishes at 8-4. So when you look at that 8-4, last year 6-6, it's another step in the right direction. 8-4, a respectable season for Nebraska and Matt Rule. But given the fact you have the potential here to start out 6-1, 7-1, something like that, maybe 8-4 doesn't look great to you, but I think Nebraska's going to be a good team. They're headed in the right direction. I think they are still clearly sort of behind the top of the Big Ten, whatever you think that is. I think it's Oregon, Ohio State, Michigan, and Penn State. I think Nebraska's clearly a level at least below that. But can they get to like what Illinois was last year? Right? Illinois was like the best team in the Big Ten that didn't make the playoffs. Could Nebraska be that in 2025? Maybe. Illinois is going to be good again this year. We'll see if they can improve and get into the playoffs. What's going to happen with Indiana? Are they going to remain sort of a tier 1-ish to 2-ish team? Do they drop off after one big year under Cignetti? A lot of question marks there. But I think Nebraska overall is going to have a pretty good year. I've got them at 8-4. I know I'm going to get some pushback on the beating Southern Cal, but losing to UCLA. But again, it's a road game at UCLA immediately after what I think would be Nebraska's biggest home win in a long, long time. Emotional celebration type situation there. And maybe it's a little bit of a hangover effect the following week on the road at UCLA. You then have a bye week. I mean, it's good to have a bye week before Penn State. That's probably your toughest game on the road at Penn State, but I don't think a bye week is enough for you to beat them. I'm in on Penn State this year. And then Iowa to close out the season, I think, is a loss as well. I've got Nebraska at 8-4. Be sure and let me know down below where you think I'm wrong. Have a good morning.